Last year, as this body honored the legacy of Martin Luther King, I gave my first speech on the floor of the House of Representatives. I shared with you all how I did not think that a woman like me could have come to serve in a place like this without the labor, the sacrifice, and the vision of Dr. King and his contemporaries who fought for civil rights. I told you in many ways my own story embodies the change that Dr. King fought so hard to bring about. Today, as we once again come together to celebrate the monumental legacy of Reverend King, I'd like to touch on an area of Dr. King's dream that I feel we are falling well short of achieving. I'm speaking, of course, of his fight to secure voting rights for people of color and push back against efforts to block access to the ballot. Today, 57 years after Dr. King marched in Selma, Alabama, to put pressure on the United States Congress and President Johnson to pass the Voting Rights Act, we find ourselves once again fighting ardently to uphold, promote, and expand voting rights. This historical moment reminds us that the struggle for justice is ever evolving, especially when it comes to the issue of systemic oppression. One of our great leaders in the fight for more just electoral systems and an inheritor of Dr. King's legacy was Lani Guinier, a brilliant Black educator, scholar, and civil rights lawyer. As a member of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, Guinier was central to the extension of Voting Rights Act in 1982. Her scholarship expanded our notions of what constitutes truly representative democracy, reminding us that merely having a vote is not enough to overcome systemic biases that disenfranchise minorities. When Guinier was working on protecting the Voting Rights Act in 1980s, she understood that the nation was in the midst of a counter-revolution on civil rights. It is impossible to ignore the resonance of this statement today. We lost Lani Guinier last Friday, but I commit to carrying on her legacy as we work to strengthen our democracy and root out discrimination. Today, as we honor the memory of Dr. King and his heroic efforts to advance voting rights, I ask you to join me in affirming your commitment to protect the right to vote, expand voter access, and broaden your conception of equality. However, we must not stop there. In truth, I'm tired of working so hard to merely maintain the gains that we have made as racial minorities in this country. It is no longer enough to simply preserve the status quo. Now is the time to reawaken the progressive spark that Dr. King ignited throughout our country. Let us harness the imaginative spirit of Dr. King and Lani Guinier, that they embodied as we collectively dream ourselves into a more just future. I leave you with one of the favorite quotes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ricks. Representative Exum.